book discussion, Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. This book is about existential questions. What are you? What is a human? What is a personality? And the answer is, I would say, very much along the lines of Camus. It's what you do. What you end up doing is really what counts. This author goes a long way in creating characters. It's, I would say, one of his trademarks. It's the first book I read, but clearly he's very meticulous about building characters. Like, you know, the depth of their psychology and relationships. But then in the end, the one thing that matters, in my opinion, in this book, when everything is said and done, is what people actually end up doing. And what you see throughout the book is that there is mostly weakness. And this reminds me a little bit also of Camus. Like questions of courage, questions of standing up, either to your own demons or other people's demons. Those questions are answered, and the answer is often people don't stand up. People don't have the courage to do the right thing. People don't have the courage to have an opinion. People are full of excuses. In this particular book, there are characters, and I don't want to give away too much, but and it's not even a story about. It's not. There's no, thriller here, no suspense. This is a story about life, about people, about a family that goes through life, and those characters, they're built very meticulously throughout the book, and then they all act, and those actions are what ends up really mattering for them and for the reader to understand who they are. And most of the characters are characterized by weakness, by cowardice, by, excuses, hiding behind, religion or scripture or some sort of moral justification of things. Some characters try to stand up. There is that contrast. The author is not completely given up on the human race. There's one character in particular, I would say Becky. She stands up to all the adversity that she's exposed to, and in my opinion does a good job in handling herself. There is another character, her brother, the older brother, in my opinion, tries to do the right thing, fails at it, but at least tries to. And then there's, other characters in the book, the parents, and there's one brother in particular who is depicted by the author as an appalling, mentally ill person that somehow one has to feel sorry for. So there's a lot of that going on, and it's not about judging people. It's not. I don't want to judge people. I don't think Jonathan is judging people. I don't think he has an intention to put you in some sort of not political position, but maybe a position where you take sides. I think I described it in a previous episode. He really, he kind of bottles up personality, and then he just opens the floodgate and lets it out. And then, the cards fall on the table and the dice fall, and this is what you get. And what you get is very often very, disappointment. And I think this, to me, reflects what human life is all about. Like, just look around yourself, look around your friends, your family. How many people do you really trust? How many people do you really think you want to be stuck on a deserted island with? those people are very, very few, in my opinion, for most of us. If your answer is no, there's many, then good for you. But I don't think that a lot of people can say that. I think the reality is that this kind of weakness and cowardness and these types of feelings, they permeate across everybody's lives. This is not just, in that sense, this book is very general, and I think it's an existential book. This is a book along the lines of La Peste, and I've thought about this recently, actually, in the context of robotics, which is interesting, because I thought about autonomous training for robots, which brings the question of like if you train a robot, how to train itself, and you don't explicitly determine what is good behavior, well then, how does the robot even have a sense for what is good behavior? Now, the idea is that maybe if you really had the opportunity to have this robot train itself in the real world, it would figure it out over time, what is good behavior. And I kind of converged towards the concept of survival, maybe as a guiding post for what good behavior could at least lead towards, or what could be a North Star for good behavior to emerge. That's the right word, for good behavior to emerge. And in that context, I was wondering also in this book, there is no right or wrong way. People keep doing what they need to do, and then behavior emerges. But it's not always good behavior. And I think the reason it's not always good behavior is because we humans, we're conditioned. There's one character in the book, actually, a child, a pre-adolescent child. And I would say, I strongly believe in the quote I recently saw in a Spanish movie, that genius, apparently Baudelaire said that, I'm not sure. Genius is when you can bottle your childhood and call it up whenever you need it. In other words, the freedom of a child, the not being biased by what we call adulthood and the sort of adult behavior, that is actually, in most cases, good behavior. And I think our interference with kids often leads them to sort of misbehave, but that's not because I think bearing any serious mental illness or anything, I think most kids are literally trying to figure out how to behave in the world. And the less we influence them, the higher the chances actually are that they will end up doing the right thing. And whatever the right thing is, that's in the eye of the beholder. In that sense, in the eye of the person. Now back to the book. This book is about existential questions, and it fits into existentialist literature. That's the way I see it, and it asks the question: what is good behavior? What is the right thing to do? And the answer to that question comes from several parties in several ways. Some people in the book hide behind scripture. There's a character, a reverend, who is, in my opinion, the worst character in the book because he has all the bad influence of people that hide behind scripture. He is a coward. He is weak. He does bad things to a lot of people under the disguise of some sort of charity and trying to help other people, when in fact he's a selfish prick. There's a lady in the book that kind of grows up in a screwed up family and tries to survive and does a good job at that. And I think in the end gets some sort of closure But you could say her actions, if we want to follow the existentialist pathway here, her actions are despicable, and she doesn't really deserve any kind of sympathy because of her actions, not because of what she's thinking or what kind of religion she believes in or any of that. Like in the end, the question is really, what is it you actually do? That's who you are. You can't hide behind any gender or religion or nationality or any of that stuff. There's a good line I recently saw actually in a TV show. If you hide behind, let's say, nationality, if you say, oh, well, I'm Polish and I live in Iceland, and the people in Iceland, they all discriminate against Polish people, for example. I'm just making this up. I'm in Iceland right now. That's why I came up with that example. You can always turn this around and say, listen, all the good things in the life that happen to you, you might have a nice wife and a successful child. He's really good at soccer and blah, blah. Is that because you're Polish? Probably not. It's probably because you did certain things that worked out for you, and that's who you really are, and that's really what it's all about. And you can flip this also into this book, right? You can ask yourself, any of the characters, let's pick the Reverend, the good things that happened to him and the bad things, are they because he grew up as a Mennonite in a fanatic religious household? I don't think so. I think it's his actions, his belief or non-belief or whatever it may be. Those are the things that actually matter, and not what his provenance is or any of that stuff. So to me, that's really the main arch of the book. It's about actions. They define the person, and personalities and characters they're built, they're important. I mean, your actions, they come from somewhere. There's something there. You can't just say, well, a person's just actions, right? Your personality, the content of your personality does matter, because that content most likely influences your actions. So there's a cross-pollination here, sort of a back and forth. Clearly there is something like that. However, as an outsider, as somebody that just looks over, reads a book, or let's say a third eye, watching, people, all you're left with is actions. There's a concept in robotics, it's called inverse reinforcement learning, and I find it a very interesting concept. It's a very straightforward concept from an engineering perspective. It's just like, let's say you want to understand what is, let's say, what is good driving, right? You want to understand what is good driving, and let's say you want to use that understanding to program a simulation engine to drive, like what good driving means, but you don't really know what good driving is. So one way to observe that is to watch people drive and then infer, that's what's called inverse reinforcement learning, infer from their behavior what actually good driving is, as defined as just simply sort of an average behavior of people driving. Now you can say the same thing about, a lot of things. You can say, let's say you want to understand, you just met a person, let's say you had a date with a girl and you want to understand, who is she? Well, one way to do it is to ask her, who are you? And then she will give you, I'm this, I'm that, I read those books, I read that. Or you just imagine you could just observe her and see who she really is. Let's say you know how she acts in certain situations. That's where I think inverse reinforcement learning is kind of like an engineering version of Albert Camus, right? What you do is really who you are. And let's say when you create what's called a reward function, which is just an algorithm that helps a robot do things. When you create a reward function, you can do that by trying to explicitly create it, or you can do it by doing inverse reinforcement learning, which again is just watch the behavior of people, let's say in the case of driving, how they drive. In the case of, let's say, a humanoid robot working in a factory, you could just ask yourself, okay, what is what is good behavior there. Let's say, you know, the robot fixes things and doesn't hurt people and so on and so forth. So in that sense, the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because I think it ties back to this book of like, we want to understand, like, you know, Jonathan goes really deep into the character buildup of these people, but then there is the actions, and sometimes they're actually congruent. Like I would say with Marian, the woman in the book, her character fits really well into her actions. Not so much some of the other characters, in my opinion. Like let's say the Reverend, no matter how hypocritic the church is and all that, you would still think that somebody with that kind of background and somebody with that kind of personality would not be this much of a coward and would not be so horrible at managing people. Now, I guess I want to finish with one more observation, which is very dear to my heart, and that's been always the case for me. I've always said, be aware of weak people. Weakness is one of the most dangerous things in the world, actually, because weak people they're almost like can't help themselves, and they create a lot of damage, and in particular they damage good things, whether it's people or just things in general. And this comes across in this book also, in my opinion. There's, you know, Becky again, I think she's the symbol of good and strength, and she gets screwed all over the place by all the weakness in her family, and she still stoically takes all of this. So she still, I think, ends the book as a strong person. She's the winner here, and that's positive and that's hopeful. And I think I want to thank Jonathan for that. You know, it's a long book, it's a tedious book, it's hard to read, it's not an easy read by any means, because not a lot of things happen. It's just lives and people and personalities. And then you really get almost rewarded with Becky being the one person in this book that counts. Everybody else is just an irrelevant footnote at this point. You hope never to have to meet people like that, because they're bad, they're weak, they destroy things. And then Becky is the winner here. She does get screwed by them financially and all that stuff, but doesn't matter, because what she has is she has love, she has support, and she has her own mental balance between who she is and what she does, and that's really what counts. Thank you.